Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of the Seth Joyner Show. And wow, did not think that this Tuesday we'd be talking about a coaching change for the Philadelphia Eagles, but here we are. Um, a lot going on right now, from the coaches to what's going to happen with the quarterbacks, so on and so forth. I watched the press conference by Jeffrey Lurie yesterday, and I think everyone was a little bit shocked by, not only the firing, but also by the comments that came out of Jeffrey Lurie, his reasoning why he let Doug Peterson go, and even much more so, why retain Howie Roseman. So much to get to and so much going on. I know, in my promos, I told you guys I had Corey Clement coming on. I had to scratch him for the day, but I do have my good friend from WIP joining me, Glenn Mack, now. We're going to talk about and break down, what's going on with the Philadelphia Eagles. And I'm going to give you guys a little short breakdown and preview of the upcoming divisional round games this Saturday and this Sunday. Glenn, my friend, how are you?
I'm all right, Seth.
Welcome.
Always nice to see you.
Absolutely. Okay, so what is it that shocked you the most about, how things turned out for Doug Peterson and the Philadelphia Eagles?
Well, what shocked me is how fast it went downhill, because it really seemed the day or two after the season like he was going to come back. Normally, when a coach gets fired, it happens right after the season. It didn't happen right away. He seemed safe. He went down to meet Jeff Lurie, and then apparently that meeting went sour. I'm sure we'll talk about why, but the flop of it, and then he was just gone. That's what surprised me.
Well, let's not glaze over it, because the Eagles organization now is creating this habit of saying one thing and doing something totally different. I know in week 17, it was expressed that, Jim Schwartz wasn't coming back, but Doug Peterson was coming back. From my point of view, why throw it out there, to the fan base and everyone that you're going to bring Doug back, and then come back and say, hey, oh, by the way, we're going to have another meeting. And you come out of that meeting and Doug Peterson is no longer the head coach.
I think it's because Jeff Lurie didn't do his due diligence. I think his intention was to bring Doug back, but the nub of the issue is that Doug wanted to hire his own coaches, choose his own staff. Lurie and Howie Roseman weren't going to go for that. And it's naive, it's foolish of Lurie not to have anticipated what Doug was going to want, and that's how that problem was created.
Well, listen, let's not glaze over that, because in the process of trying to find another coach to run this team, every other coach, or every coach that they've earmarked to be Doug's predecessor, they're looking at that. Who in the world wants to coach a team that don't have control over their own coaching staff? Now, the roster, I get. A lot of people believe that the GM and player personnel and the head coach should be the ones that make the decisions on the roster. But I don't think I've ever heard of an organization saying that you can't pick your own guys. And I guess everyone knew that was the circumstances, but it really didn't rear its ugly head until last year, when Doug came out and said, oh, Mike Groh is going to be here. And the next day he was forced to step in front of the mic and say that, oh, by the way, I'm firing Mike Groh.
Yeah, and that's another example of what you brought up before, which is the Eagles say one thing and then 2 days later it turns out to be something else. And you talk about how, coaches get to choose their own staff. Certainly a coach that's won a Super Bowl chooses his own staff. I can't think of any time that has happened. But that's what's happened here, and not the first time it's happened. It happened with Doug Groh. News kind of leaked out in the last hour that Doug has told people that the general manager wanted to fire Frank Reich after the 2016 season, and that Doug had to fight to keep him. And of course, we know how instrumental Reich was in them winning the Super Bowl. And then Reich goes on to coach Indianapolis and do a good job. So stuff's going to start dribbling out now. Seth, you know how these things happen. Everybody wants to get their side of the story out. So now that comes out. So this has been a festering and repeated problem with this franchise.
Well, hey, listen, I don't want to jump the gun. There's so much to get to. I throw you something and you throw me a little tidbit, and then you're talking about the crux of all of this. In my opinion, is Howie. I'm trying to figure out what it is that Jeffrey Lurie sees in Howie to the point that he's going to remain his guy. The thing that dumbfounds me the most is that when Jeffrey fired Chip, one of his main things was, okay, everyone in the organization now is accountable. There's accountability across the board. Okay. So you hire Doug. He wins you a Super Bowl in his second year. He goes to the playoffs 3 consecutive years in a row. And then you decide to fire him, but keep the guy who is, for all intents and purposes, decimated your roster and wasted a bunch of draft picks. And It seems like he's untouchable.
Yeah, and by the way, put them $65 million over the cap right now, which is going to make rebuilding a really hard process. They got some contracts they're going to have to get out from, and I'm sure we'll talk about the quarterback, what they decide to do with that. So why is that? Why is it that Howie gets to stay and everybody goes? The best answer I can give you is that he trusts him, not necessarily as a talent evaluator, not as anything else, but he trusts him. My own personal belief is that Jeff Lurie was so burned by the Chip Kelly experience that he is just going to stay with the guy who, in his mind, isn't going to betray him, isn't going to undercut him. He just has faith in Howie as a friend and a person. Not a great way to run a business necessarily, but I think that's what that boils down to.
Well, come on. You mean to tell me, Glenn, that in the world of professional football, that you can't find football people that you're going to pay, hundreds of thousands of dollars to, that you can trust, that you don't have out clauses within those contracts that allows you to get out from under that guy? And how is he going to undercut him? If I own a business and I'm writing my employees checks, they don't have the ability to undercut me because I'm the boss. Yeah, I'm the head guy.
You're talking Seth logic, and I happen to agree with your logic, Seth. But that's, I'm searching for answers because it's certainly not performance-based that he's keeping Howie in that position right now. And if he'd come out, I'll be honest, there was part of me that expected yesterday when the news conference was called, we knew that Doug was dead man. He was going to be gone. But there was a part of me that thought, okay, he's going to keep Howie, but he's going to keep Howie as the contract guy. He's going to keep Howie as the business end of the guy, the general manager part of the business, but not the personnel part of the business. And I was a little bit surprised that Howie not only has lost no power, but probably has gained power.
Glenn, the thing that blows my mind, among other things that Jeffrey said, he pretty much said, we've got 5 people in this organization in the future that are going to be GMs in the NFL. And he mentioned John Dorsey, Jeremiah Washburn, Ian Cunningham, Andy Waddell, Catherine Raish, Brandon Brown. And my thing is, if Howie is good at the salary cap and you've got all of these GM minds within your organization, well, why don't you split up those duties as the operational guy and allow someone to handle different pieces or different, departments within your organization? Because yesterday, Jeffrey and listen, I give the Philadelphia media a lot of credit. Howard asked some good questions. Rube asked some good questions. Les Bowen asked some great questions. They were really trying to hold Jeffrey's feet to the fire on Howie. And at every turn, Glenn, he tried to talk about the team, the operational, the football operations team. And he did not want to specifically talk about Howie Roseman. But at the end of the day, Howie Roseman is over everybody else. The only guy that's higher than Howie Roseman is Jeffrey Lurie.
Yeah. And I think Howie is 90% of that decision making. I mean, John Dorsey's there. That's great. By the way, referring to John Dorsey as a GM of the future, he may be, but it's not because he's this young up and comer that Howie discovered. John Dorsey is a guy who was a GM, lost the gig. He's here as a parking spot. That's why he's here. He's here until the next thing comes along. As far as those other great young minds, I don't know. All I know is this. Seth, you can look at the Eagles draft picks over the last 5 years, as can I. And the reason the Eagles were 4-11-1 this season, more than anything else, is a dearth of talent, is the bad draft picks. And we can get into the free agents as well, but you build a team through the draft. You build a team by having first rounders and second rounders who are pro bowlers, by having middle round guys who are starters, by having late round guys who can become special teamers. You and Clyde Simmons being great examples of guys who were far better than that, but that's how you build a team. The Eagles' first round and second round picks, I mean, they can't even get on the field sometimes. The middle round picks are generally washouts, and the late round picks have never been heard again. That's why they're so bad, and that's what Lurie, as much as he talked around it, could not evade as the crux of the problem, and that falls on Howie Roseman.
Well, I mean, he even defended it to the point, hey, listen, everyone's going to have, hits and misses. He even took it to the point where, you look at teams who have been in the playoffs and the precipitous fall-offs, talent-wise. I mean, he defended him at every turn.
Yeah.
And listen, I'm gonna talk about, the lack of talent. But what you guys that's watching this show need to understand, that it is one thing to draft a player, Glenn. It's one thing to draft a player. But that's where the work really begins. Because if you don't have the coaching staff that can develop and teach and raise these players the right way, I don't care how talented they are. And I get it. We get upset every single time we see DK Metcalf do something outstanding. We get upset every time we play the Washington football team and Terry McLaurin roasts us. We get upset. We sit back and every single Sunday we're trying to hold up what Jalen Reagor did against what Justin Jefferson did.
Yeah.
Okay, but I submit to everyone. And I'm not trying to let Howie off the hook in the least little bit because you know what? He missed the ball on all of these picks, okay? But if you can't develop your players, then it doesn't matter whether you draft talented players or not, okay? And I've been saying this ever since, man, you can go way back to even when Chip Kelly was here. I was saying it when Schwartz came in and took over the defense. I'm looking at these guys and I don't see the development because these guys are making the same mistakes week after week, year after year. That tells me it's a coach teaching problem.
Well, one thing I'll add to that, I think the Eagles have had 5 wide receiver coaches in the last 6 years. If I'm off, I'm not off by much. Guys just come through. Greg Lewis is here, he's gone. Unland's here, he's gone. This guy's here, he's gone. It's a different wide receiver coach every year, and the wide receivers never get better. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside's is a high draft pick last year, a second rounder. A lot of rookie wide receivers have a tough time. He'll be better his second year. He couldn't even get on the field his second year. The Eagles, when Doug won the Super Bowl, his staff was a lot better than it was this year. I mean, it's a parallel to, you remember the first half of Andy's tenure here. Andy had great assistant coaches. Jim Johnson passed away. Ron Rivera gets another job. Harbaugh gets another job. That's the success of it. But you have to be able to get new guys coming in who are as good as the old guys. And Doug, like Andy, was completely unable to do that.
Well, let's transition to one of the things that I wanted to talk about was Jeffrey's reasoning why he fired Doug. Okay, I mean, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but I want to get to the crux of it, and this is what the fan base really needs to hear, because I love watching press conferences. I really do, because as a former
I've been to too
player,
many of them.
well, I'm going to tell you why. Because as a former player and a person who's now a part of the media, I look and I listen in a different way, Glenn. I'm listening for the underlying things.
Yeah, sure.
That the average person who hasn't been engrossed in the game, that they would miss.
Yeah.
So I'm listening.
What he says, what he means. And
exactly.
Two different things.
Exactly. So, quote, Jeffrey Lurie said that Doug didn't deserve to get fired. Yeah. That just blew my mind. Okay. So he didn't deserve to get fired. Why the hell do you fire him?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Oh, he praised him going out the door.
And then the thing that really got me is he really began to talk about and tell us his reasoning for firing Doug and what the future is going to look like. And that kind of played into it all. Okay. He talked about, the last 3 years, the 17, 18, 19, and 20 season. Okay. And how they were in this window to win. And almost, he didn't say it this way, but they pretty much mortgaged their position today to be able to compete for a Super Bowl then.
Yeah, he said we made some decisions based on the short term that aren't necessarily going to be beneficial in the long term. Right.
There you go. So ultimately, what he said is that window's shut.
Yeah.
After this season, that window's closed.
Yeah, they're in rebuild.
And we're in. He didn't say rebuild.
Well, okay.
Owners don't say those words. That's the point that I'm getting to, because he used word like retool, transitions, transition points. I mean, he used words like that because you can't tell a fan base that you're counting on 60, 70,000 people showing up for 8 games. Hey, you know what? We're in a rebuild. Guess what? We're going to stink for the next 2 years, 3 years. But we still want you to buy those season tickets and come and watch. He's not going to do that. Okay?
No, he's not going to do that. And I mean, you thought politicians are slick in the way they can talk around something. He did. All that said, I don't think it fooled anybody. People know what it means.
Well, we know what it means.
Okay.
It's up to you and me to kind of decipher it and tell my viewers and my listeners what he meant. And I want to get to this point because he's saying that it was unfair to Doug he was basically saying it's unfair to Doug to stick around under the pretenses and the circumstances that they now find themselves in. He said because Doug is thinking more short-term and midterm, but we're thinking more midterm and long-term. We're trying to get the team back to, winning and back to where it was. And quote, he said I'm thinking about the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. If that doesn't speak rebuild, I don't know what does. The only thing he didn't do was call it a rebuild.
Yeah, I know. And he's lucky that he owns a team in Philadelphia, because these fans will keep coming. They may not be happy with the product on the field. They will let him know that. But in other markets, fans would just, okay, you're going to go 5-11 next year. I'll sit at home. These fans will go, and that's something that he's really that's very lucky for him. But there's no doubt he can call it whatever he wants. He can call it a retool. He can call it a transition. He can call it a metamorphosis. Whatever nonsense. Seth, they're gonna and listen. It's probably the smart move because you can't patch together a bald tire. They're going to start all over again. Again, I know we'll get into the specifics of who's playing where, but they're going to be bad for a couple of years.
Well, I mean, does Doug Peterson look at that and say to himself, maybe that decision wasn't all, Jeffrey Lurie's? Maybe because the meeting was to, okay, let's see what your vision is for the football team moving forward. That was the genesis of the meeting, to see if his vision for the team matched up with Jeffrey's vision for the team. Okay. Jeffrey, Doug's vision is, okay, how do we right the ship and win next year? Jeffrey's vision is, we got to take a step back. We got to acquire more assets. We got to get young. We got to get the salary cap under control, and those things usually mean that you're going to take a step back. So if Doug comes in already on the hot seat because of what transpired this year, and he's got a team that goes 6-10 or 7-9 next year, if he's lucky, the fans, the media, and everyone else is going to be calling for his head on the platter. Thanks for the Super Bowl, but you got to go.
Yeah. I definitely think that's all part of it. I think the bottom line breakup was caused by what we started with. Who's going to be my assistants? By all reports, by all accounts, Doug wanted Press Taylor to be promoted to offensive coordinator. He argued hard against Phipp being fired as special teams coach. He wanted his defense coordinator from within. He had his guys, and I think Lurie, right or wrong, looked at this staff and said, we can't win with these guys. I know I fired the offensive coordinator last year. What he did this year with this college of coaches with Scangarello and then, and all that, like, that's a disaster. And I think that's the bottom line issue that caused them to go kaplooey.
So Glenn, let me ask you this. If the focus has shifted from a short term to midterm to long term, then what would have been the problem with retaining Doug? And what would have been the problem with allowing him to have his way with his coaches if you know that you're not going to be good for the next 2 years anyway? Well, if you really believe in the guy.
You told me 5 minutes ago that one of the problems is that players don't get better at their positions, that they're not coached well. So I'm not carrying Jeff Lurie's water. But if the argument is that the coaches aren't making the players better, you got to get different coaches. And that's position coaches, right? I mean, you know better than I. The players deal more with their position coach than they do with the head coach. And you got to have strong position coaches if you're going to get better. And they did. They don't.
Okay. And listen, I'm just playing the devil's advocate because I know, listen, there's a lot of people out here. I did a radio show this morning. They were talking about, what's Philly like? Are people upset? And I said, quite frankly, there's a lot of people in Philadelphia that love Doug Peterson, for what he's done.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people also that grew extremely tired of, their lack of offensive, efficiency and creativity and his, unwillingness to run the football. All of those things, kind of played into what we see going on as far as, the city. I'm like, trust me, the city is chaotic right now. The fan base, is in an uproar. But I would venture to say that there's a 50-50 split between those who are upset that Doug is gone and those that are happy that he's gone. I said, and more people want Howie gone than anything else.
That's it. I think most people would have, as much as people like and appreciate Doug, and they will. And Doug's going to come back someday for the ceremony and get a standing ovation. They'll put him in the Eagles Hall of Fame and all that, and it'll be great. But I think a lot of people, probably 50%, maybe a little more, would say, "Oh yeah, it's time for Doug to go." But 90% will tell you it's time for Howie to go. And that's the part that people can't reconcile. If you're gonna get rid of the coach, you better get rid of that general manager, because getting rid of the coach by himself doesn't solve anything.
So how long, in your opinion, how long can Jeffrey protect Howie? Because the media, you know how it is in Philly. The media and the fans are relentless.
Yeah.
I mean, next year, you can't expect for the talent level to be much greater than it was this year. That's almost an impossibility. The only place that I can think of that might be better is the offensive line, because you're going to get, all of those guys that were injured back, and, hopefully they can stay healthy. But you're not going to get better anywhere else, in my opinion. So how long can he endure the media bashing and the fact that, the majority, 90% of the fans in Philadelphia and the media want to see Howie gone?
I think that he better damn well have a good draft class this year. That's what it comes down to. You have the 6th pick of the draft. That better be a home run. Your 2nd round pick is high. That guy's got to contribute as a rookie. I will give you that some players develop slower than others, but you often know in the first year if the guy's a washout. We've seen too many of those. If he has a good, solid draft class, adds a free agent or two that contributes, even if they go 6 and 10, people see like, okay, well, there's talent here for the future. But if they have another draft, another free agent class like they did this year, more the draft than anything, that's it. I mean, I have to think Howie's at least on double secret probation right now.
Well, I'm curious to see, because Howie's, especially the last 2 drafts, he's made a habit of trying to outsmart everybody else and get someone who he thought was better than they were, instead of taking the obvious pick that was right there in front of you. I'll be watching very curiously this draft to see if the best available player, according to all the pundits and according to what's on the board, will they just take the best player there? Everybody seems to want another wide receiver. And I'll say this, Glenn, I'm not in favor of it. I watched that kid, Devontae Smith, last night, incredible first half of football. Okay. But in the last 4 drafts, we've drafted 10 wide receivers. 10. Count them, 10 in the last 4 drafts. We used a first rounder last year, a second rounder the year before on a wide receiver. We drafted 3 wide receivers in this year's draft and traded for one that opted out that people forgot about. And everyone wants to use the number 6 overall on another wide receiver. I feel like, at number 6, this team has way too many holes for them to even pick at number 6. You've got to trade that pick and multiply your picks, especially if Jeffrey's mandate is younger and more resources.
I might trade down a little bit. I mean, I would trade if there's somebody, say one of the quarterbacks is left at pick 6, and there's a team that really wants to get that quarterback, and I'm trading from 6 to 9, 6 to 11, and I get a first round pick the year after, or second round pick, something like that, I'm game. But I'm not trading down from 6 to 18 or 20. And the good news, I'm not like you, I'm not entirely opposed to drafting a wide receiver. The good news is the Eagles have holes everywhere. So if it's an offensive lineman is the best guy, great. If it's a cornerback, boy, they need cornerbacks. Seth, they haven't drafted a linebacker in the first round since 1978.
They ain't gonna draft one.
No, probably not. But if the board falls that way this year, I mean, I'm trying to think of a position I wouldn't take a tight end in the first round. I got Goddard. Tell me what other position you wouldn't take in the first round. Probably not a running back, because I have so many other.
No, you're not. Right? I think the only positions, in my opinion, you can't take a running back, you can't take a tight end.
Right.
I'm trying to think, I'm of the opinion, because that's just the way that I think, that you can't draft an 11th wide receiver, in your last 5 drafts. That alone, should have Jeffrey's ire that they've had
Maybe
to.
I hear you, but I still would take one if he's the best guy. I wouldn't take a defensive tackle. I'm committing a ton of money to defensive, but I'd take a pass rushing edge guy.
But the problem is, okay, you draft a guy at 6, okay, you have to play him next year.
Yes.
You already got a guy that you drafted at 21 that you felt like you had to play, that you got nothing out of this year. So now you got 2 players in subsequent years, 2 wide receivers that you're forced to put on the field and play, and they might not be your best 2 wide receivers.
Yeah, but here's the deal. None of the other wide receivers are any good. It's not.
You don't know. We don't know that, though.
Well, who am I keeping off the field? Arcega-Whiteside?
Listen, what you did was, your best wide receiver, you took him off the field so that you could put your highest paid wide receiver on the field. That's the first mistake that you made.
I agree with you. I agree, but
Quez Watkins didn't get on the field until the end of the year. Because what? You kept trying to cram John Hightower, who was Nelson Aguilar 2.0 at his worst, not being able to track the ball. You kept trying to put that guy on the field, So, we really don't know. Listen, these kids had no OTAs. They had no training camp. They had no preseason games. We don't know what they can do. And furthermore, we don't know what they can do. Listen, if I was the head coach of this football team, I'd say, Mike Quick, step out of that box. Come down here and show these guys how to run routes.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to put your pride aside. You've been struggling at that position too long to not at least ask the most prolific wide receiver in the history of your franchise to lend his expertise.
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
As we said, they've been through 5 wide receiver coaches in 6 years. None of them was named Mike Quick.
Listen, even if you bring him in to advise, okay, if you're trying to win, you don't give 2 hoots about stepping on anybody's toes. And you know what? That coach that you brought in to coach wide receivers, that all he can do is hand his guys a game plan on Wednesday morning. Okay, maybe he might learn something from a guy like Mike Quick.
Hey, you know who else? And he's not doing it now, but you know who else they didn't ask for his advice for wide receivers for a lot of years? Harold Carmichael.
Exactly.
Harold could play a little bit.
I don't understand it. There's a glaring hole. There's a glaring problem. Okay. And you've got guys all around you with expertise and opinions. Okay. Sit down with those guys and see what they have to say. I don't even play the wide receiver position, but I know enough about the game to look at these guys, and I can tell you why they can't separate, why they don't get open, why they're so unproductive. That's coming from a guy that played linebacker, that's always, in tune, or trying to keep myself in tune with the game and what's going on. You're talking about guys that actually did it at the Pro Bowl level, and you won't siphon some of that off?
If you don't mind, I want to shift it a little bit, because you played linebacker and you were a great linebacker, and the Eagles had a history of great linebackers, from Bednarik to Berge to you and Byron and to Willie T. And this team and Jeremiah Trotter, this team had some great linebackers over years and years and years. And then apparently decided linebackers don't matter. And we talked before, they haven't drafted a linebacker in the first round for more than 40 years. It's unbelievable. Do we have reason to believe that that's an organizational thing, or that a new coach will come in and say, or a new defensive coordinator, who maybe is the head coach, will come in and say, no, my defense believes that those guys who play, between the line and the secondary, I need good guys to play there.
I think it's an organizational thing, Glenn. I think it started with Joe Banner, and he passed it down to Howie Roseman, and Howie Roseman has been operating off of those auspices, ever since he's been in control. I mean, you think about it. You have to go back. You have to go back to Jim Johnson to begin to understand why it turned out that way. Jeremiah Trotter was a middle linebacker. He was going to control in between the tackles from tackle to tackle. Okay. He's a tackling machine. He's going to give you 130, 140 tackles every single year. But he wasn't a pass rusher, and he wasn't a guy that's going to give you interceptions. Okay. I'm trying to remember the linebackers because, the names. I remember they had one Sam linebacker that lined up over the tight end and would just beat the crap out of the tight end every single game. But as the game began to change, okay, and you started having these tight ends that you flexed out in these 3 wide receiver sets, the need for a linebacker to do that went away because now you needed to go nickel and bring the extra defensive back in and take that guy off the field. It even speaks even more to what defense looks like now. There's no more 3.
There's not 3, but most teams play 2, and a lot of teams have 1 who's a real impact player or 2.
But that's my point. That's the point that I was getting to.
Okay, sorry.
Today, there's no 3-4-4-3 defenses anymore, unless teams go to regular personnel or they go to short yardage situations. Okay, most of the time, teams are in a 4-2. You got 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers. Okay, so then teams start dictating personnel because when they go 4 wide receivers, now you have to go dime. You have to.
Yeah.
So offenses are dictating based upon personnel what you look like and what your personnel groupings look like. Okay.
Okay.
If you go too light, you go dime. The offensive coordinator, the strategy is okay, run the football.
Right.
Run it at that DB that doesn't know where he fits, that's playing like a linebacker in the box. Okay. When you go nickel or 4-2, it's like, okay, how do we isolate one of those linebackers on a back or a tight end out of the backfield? So it's this. So you have to go and draft linebackers that can A, play the run, and B, play the pass. Glenn, every good defense, look at every good defense in the NFL today. Every good defense has at least one hellraiser at linebacker.
Yeah. I watched the playoffs last weekend. I saw those guys in every game.
You got to have them.
Yeah.
You got to have them. And they've ignored the position in hopes that the defensive line could be so dominant that it would cover up the inefficiencies at the linebacker position. And it never works that way. You watch linebackers struggle in coverage this year. You watch linebackers game plan this year. They were game plan in coverage. You watch running plays that were game plan to take advantage, of the lack of ability at the linebacker position. To me, at the NFL level, that's unconscionable. You can't allow that to happen.
Yeah.
But
it's been over years, and it's so obvious to everybody. It always amazes me that it's something they continue to do. And I understand you've only got so much resource and you got to allocate it where you want. And they put a lot of money this year into the defensive line, into the defensive tackles. I get that, but you can't ignore one basic position year after year and think it's going to work.
Well, I guess the question is on the defensive side of the ball, what are they going to do? You sign Malik Jackson. He gets hurt, misses the whole year, comes back this year. You sign Hargrave.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you got 3 guys that are probably in the, $6 to $7 million and up range.
Yeah, Fletch makes a ton.
And 2 of those guys gave you absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you've got to go and you got to retool that specific area because those dollars have to come off the books because of the lack of production. If they weren't productive this year, you can't believe that they're going to be any more productive next year.
Yep.
So that has to be fixed. Then you got a change of philosophy because a dominant defensive line, which I agree with, it might not be the philosophy of the next defensive coordinators that come in. See, this is why I talk about Glenn, I said, you asked me about what I would do and where I would spend the draft pick. I think that in order for an offense to be dominant, and Jeffrey says more important than defense is an elite offense. Okay. And you can see that in the way that they've drafted.
Yeah, they've always done that.
Most of their draft picks the last 3 years have been to give Carson all the weapons that he could have and all the depth on the offensive line so that the offense could be elite and they could be dominant. Okay. There's times when they were, times when they weren't. But you can't just completely ignore the defensive side of the ball either. But what is the most important part of the offense? Beyond the quarterback is your offensive line. What is the most important part of your defense? Is your defensive line. Because if you can't control the line of scrimmage on either side of the ball, you have no shot whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah. The offensive line is an interesting one because it was so good over the last few years. And I want to believe that Lane Johnson's going to come back well. I want to believe that Mailata's not going to be a Pro Bowler, but be good enough to be an above average starter at left tackle. I love Brandon Brooks, but I don't know that he can come back from one more injury. Gosh, I hope so. I think Jason Kelsey's kind of on his last legs. Yeah, salute the guy, Hall of Famer. But they are going to have to start investing in all, and the right guard is really nothing to speak of. So they're going to have to invest in all those spots.
Well, and it's incumbent for Carson Wentz, if their decision is that he's going to be the guy, then you better shore up that area. That's why I'm saying, if Carson's going to be the guy, you've already spent enough resources on wide receiver. You better figure out how to protect him because he doesn't look to run the ball. And it's all about philosophy. Maybe the next offensive staff that comes in here, maybe the way that they run their offense is different. The reason why Jalen Hurts could have some success, because in his mind, it was like, okay, 1001, 1002, 1003, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Carson's mentality is, I've got to make this play work. 1003, 1003, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to stand in here and I'm going to wait for that guy to come open. Okay. So it all depends on what your offensive philosophy is and how you want your quarterback to play.
Okay. True. And they need to build the line of the future. But one thing I've always been told, and this is by including guys who've coached offensive line, is you can get a guy in the middle round and build him into an offensive lineman. That offensive lineman can be created in the NFL more than a lot of positions. I mean, I remember that the famous Cowboys offensive line from the 90s when they won those Super Bowls. Those guys were all like 4th round, 5th round. Those were picks there. If that's true, you just need a really smart guy who spots those guys and picks them in the 3rd, 4th round.
Listen, I agree, but let me say this. It's dangerous business to put a guy out there that you're trying to build when you got a $32 million quarterback behind him.
Yeah, I hear that.
A guy who has a history of injuries and a guy who's reluctant to run because he's aware of those injuries and those hits.
Yeah.
That's
was really skittish this year when the offensive line failed. That's really when he went into the tank.
Oh, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. I mean, you can even see over time, Jalen Hurts began to, by the time they got to the end of the year, 2 or 3 games in, he had begun to get to a point where his eyes were beginning to leave downfield and begin to lock into what was around him, So that's why I say, or the other option. Okay, the other option is, because I always say, Glenn, there's 2 ways to protect your quarterback. You either protect your quarterback with great offensive line play, or you protect your quarterback by running the football. Okay. Now they made the decision not to run the football. And on top of it, they had a bad offensive line.
Yeah.
So neither quarterback is going to be able to be successful under those auspices until they make the decision that, okay, And the thing that blew me away the most is I can remember when we made the trade for Brandon Brooks, and Doug Peterson said, "I want road graders." Well, what the hell are you going to do with road graders if you're going to make them block, 45, 50 times a game for the pass?
Going backwards instead of going forwards. Yeah, I hear it. I also think that if history teaches me anything with Jeff Lurie, he's going to look for another Andy Reid. That's what he got. That's what he liked. That's what he wanted in Doug, and Doug was that, and successfully. And I can't imagine that he's going to hire an offensive, a head coach who's going to say, hey, we're going to run the ball 25, 30 times a game. I would be stunned, Seth.
Well, before I let you run, tell me who you think that is. I've got an idea who it is, but I don't think that it will be the match that they're looking for because of his personality.
You don't think it'll be Lincoln Riley? You don't think it will be? I'll tell you who I would love it to be. I'd love it to be either Eric Bieniemy or Brian Daboll, the Bills' offensive coordinator. I don't think it's going to be either of them. The name that's coming up the most and the name that fits the pattern is Mike Kafka, the former quarterback who played here for a while. He's supposed to be really good with quarterbacks. I think the number one priority that Lurie will seek is a head coach who he thinks can build back Wentz. So it's going to be a quarterback guru.
Well, I think that Eric Bieniemy gives you that because I think that he can bring Kafka along with him as an offensive coordinator.
Okay, I love it.
And that would be a good fit. The problem is, from what I know of Eric Bieniemy, he's an extremely authoritative, no BS type of guy. And I go back to, the reasoning why Doug Peterson was hired in the first place. He was hired because Howie wanted to never be put in that position that Chip put him in ever again. So he hired a guy that he could kind of control, a guy who he could manipulate, and that finally blew up in his face this year because I honestly believe Doug told him, "Hey, go kick rocks."
Yeah, I think Doug thought if I'm going out my way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I would love to see Eric Bieniemy be the guy, but he's not going to come in here and let Howie, pull the crap he pulled, with Doug for 5 years. That's just not going to happen. Lincoln Riley. I'm like, come on, man. Why do we always think that the shiny thing in college can transition to the next level?
Yeah. No, it usually doesn't. And the smart move is to take a coordinator. I would not be opposed to them taking a defensive coordinator, but I don't think they ever will.
Well, he said it was.
Be?
Listen, he said it wasn't off the table. I think that, in my opinion, it's a good move. Why? Why is it a good move? Because we watched Doug try to, for 5 years, try to manage the entire thing, to be the guy that manages the team, to delegate duties to the entire team, to make all the decisions, and then turn around and try to put together a game plan and call plays during the game. I think you're better served to have a guy who the only thing he's going to do is be the CEO and turn over offensive play calling and defensive play calling to the respective guys and step back and make the decisions, make the hard decisions and step back. I would love to see that. And to me, a defensive coach can do that.
So would you like to see Todd Bowles? Would you like to see what's his name, Robert Saleh from San Francisco?
Yeah, the question is, who are they bringing to the table from an offensive perspective? Listen, I love Todd Bowles and his defensive philosophy. I love what Salah has been able to do with the 49ers. I know if he comes here, we're going to get some darn linebackers. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But the thing that hinders those guys is who's going to be your offensive guy, your offensive people. Because our quarterback is still the highest paid guy on the team.
Yeah,
and you got to figure out how to fix him or create a competition at some point that gets you the best guy for the job.
Well, somewhere out there is that position coach, probably a quarterback coach, who's ready to make the move to offensive coordinator. I don't know who that is, but that's the guy they got to find, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, this is a mess of huge magnitude, and I don't know how they figure it out because Bieniemy, they can't talk to him until the Chiefs are out of the playoffs. And Jeffrey, was very assertive in the fact that there is no hurry here. There is, if it goes into February, it goes into February. Again, there you go. That mentality gets you in trouble.
Well, I think there's now 7 head coaching jobs open. The Eagles are not the most attractive of those. If I get to coach Herbert, right, as a young quarterback, and that comes with me, I no offense to Carson Wentz, I'll take that over that. I think the problem the Eagles have, they're not the least attractive. Houston's, even with Deshaun Watson, that's the bad job. The Jets is always a bad job. But the Eagles are kind of in the middle there. So they be careful.
Someone threw the question to Jeffrey yesterday. There was like, with things being the way they are, what's your selling point, for a potential head coach? He says organizational resources, facilities, the playoffs that we made, our history of making the playoffs. He said the cap is really not an issue. He said because would have been within about 12 months, we can turn the cap around. He said we have 2 assets at quarterback, potential stars, both of them. Now I'm quoting him verbatim because I wrote all this stuff down. He said we got a great fan base. The owner is committed. We have a good organizational. We're great organizational wide. Like we're not good in any one area. We're good everywhere. Okay. He got this right. It's the best city, in the world from a fan's perspective. And then he ended with, there's no rush, no hurry, no pressure.
Well, I agree with 1 or 2 of those, mostly that it's a great city to play and coach, and it's a great fan base, and people are invested. But whoever he's going to hire is going to have to know that he's got to work with Howie Roseman and make that work. And that's not the easiest thing to sell to me. So, listen, Seth, I like you. I am invested in this team and root for it, and really hope that next year when we're doing this, we can say what a miraculous turnaround it was.
It would be. My friend, thank you for your time, man. I'm going to let you run, and I'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure. Best
All right. Thank you, man.
Take care.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Glenn McNow, the great surprise, the Philadelphia Eagles have fired head coach Doug Peterson, as you all know, and the search is on, for the next successor. But we got playoff football going on. In the last 7-8 minutes here, I'm going to give you a little breakdown, my thoughts on, the divisional games last week. And, hey, don't take my picks and go bet and lose your money and then come back next week and be mad at me. But I was 5-1 last week. I should have gave you guys those picks. If you were paying attention on social media, you'll see the only game I missed was the Seattle Seahawks because I thought the Rams were actually going to start and play, and they did. Played the young guy, but he got hurt, and Jared Goff came in, not very spectacular, but hey, at the end of the day, he played well for them. Okay, let's see. So let's talk about the Saturday games. We got the Rams going into Green Bay. This is an interesting matchup just strictly because you've got probably the best defense going against the best offense in the NFC divisional game. I think that it's interesting because you also got a Rams team that's transitioned to running the football in order to be able to throw the ball with play action and whatnot. So it's going to be a chess match. But I still think, Aaron Rodgers and their ability to run the ball with the emergence of this kid Dixon. Now, you don't see a lot of him, but he came out 2 games, I think the second and last game, big bruiser. Green Bay also wants to run the ball, but they also got a guy in Aaron Jones, who can cause some problems as well. And I was calling all game, for screens. You have to run screens against a defense that is as aggressive as the Rams are. And I think you'll see them come out and screen them to death early, then get into their run game and play action pass. Will win the Green Bay Packers this game. But no doubt about it, the Rams are a force on the defensive side of the ball. The other divisional game on Saturday pits the Baltimore Ravens against the Buffalo Bills. I like the fact that the Ravens are peaking at the right time. Their defense can look spectacular at times. At other times, they really make you scratch their head because they have so much talent. I think that the Buffalo Bills are one of the most well-rounded football teams, from the defensive to the offensive to the special team side. And this is just going to be an interesting game. Lamar Jackson, listen, he's the wild card. And I can promise you, Leslie Frazier, and he's going to have a game plan to figure out how to contain and keep Lamar Jackson in the backfield, in the pocket, and make him play the game from the pocket. With all of those things added up, and as great as Josh Allen has begun to play, even though the Bills struggled with the Indianapolis Colts last week, and the Ravens took it down to the wire. I think that the emotional high that the Ravens were on last week is going to hurt them in this game this week. Listen, we saw it. I told people when the Minnesota Vikings beat the Saints and then had to come to Philadelphia and play in the NFC Championship game, I said to everybody then, when you have to get your emotions that high, as high as the Minnesota Vikings were, you only got so many energy stores in your body. Then they had to come back to Philadelphia the next week for the NFC Championship game. And I said, there is no way the emotions and the emotional high that they experienced in winning that game over the New Orleans Saints, that they have nothing left in the tank. And after Patrick Robinson intercepted that ball and took it back for a touchdown, the Minnesota Vikings were done. That win for the Baltimore Ravens over the Tennessee Titans and all the hoopla at midfield, in my opinion, that emotional exhaustion is going to catch up with the Baltimore Ravens in this football game, and the Buffalo Bills will advance on to the AFC Championship. Sunday's game, the first game, the Cleveland Browns versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Listen, I'm a year late. I bet last year that the Cleveland Browns would be a 500 team and they would ascend from there. They won 11 games this year, get their first win in the playoffs in 18 years, and exercise their arch nemesis, the Pittsburgh Steelers. But let's be real. At the end of the day, the buck stops in Kansas City. The Cleveland Browns are not going to Kansas City and dealing with Patrick Mahomes and all those weapons that he's had. And with Andy Reid having a full extra week, basically coming off a bye, and we know what his record is coming off a bye, to prepare for this game, the Kansas City Chiefs running away will move on to the AFC Championships against the Buffalo Bills. This last game, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Saints, is, to me, the most intriguing game of the weekend, because you have a Saints team that took the Buccaneers to the woodshed twice in the same year. We all know how difficult it is to beat the same team 3 times in one season. Drew Brees and his offense looks out of sync. This defense doesn't look like they're as dominant as they were early in the year. It seems like from the time that Jalen Hurts beat them, and I think that was week 13 or week 14, that they just have not been the same defense. Now, granted, the Buccaneers have got to go into New Orleans and get this victory. But I see a Tampa Bay offense that's on the ascend. Their Achilles heel is their defense, particularly their cornerbacks and their ability to cover these wide receivers. But I think this game could potentially be a shootout. And I think, a lot of people don't want to hear this, but I feel like Tom Brady, redeems himself from 2 regular season losses against the New Orleans Saints and wins this game, and then get their Parkers ready, their gloves and their hats. They got to go to Green Bay for the NFC Championship. Well, guys, that's the show for the week. There was a lot going on in Philly, a lot of my notes I didn't get to share with you. But we'll be back next week for another great show. I want to thank Glenn McNow, WIP, spending some time with me today, breaking it down for you all. I want to thank you guys for tuning in today. I want to thank my producers, Tom Schrader and Derek Stevens. And as usual, hey, I always say it, our time is our most precious asset. So thank you for spending it with me. And most of all, be good to each other and treat each other well, but most importantly, love each other. I'll see you.